I don't care what sob story you have. No legitimate teenager has this kind of cash. This is stolen money, fraud money, or both. A 45-year-old blonde bank manager named Jennifer Peterson was jabbing her finger aggressively toward a 16-year-old black girl named Michelle Williams, who sat with an almost unnaturally calm composure despite the chaos that was erupting around her. The entire bank had stopped. Customers were frozen mid-transaction, tellers had their hands suspended over keyboards, and everyone was staring at this explosive confrontation. But Michelle slowly stood up, her movements deliberate and controlled, and said in a voice that cut through all the noise, "Mrs. Peterson, you need to stop talking. Right now." You would have thought that would be enough to make Jennifer pause, maybe reconsider her approach. But no, instead she absolutely exploded. "You think I'm stupid? I've seen every scam in the book. I'm calling the FBI." Jennifer spun around to face her staff, her face red with fury. No legitimate teenager walks around with $15,000 unless it's stolen money or fraud schemes. The staff members were nodding in agreement, customers were pulling out their phones to record, and Jennifer was riding high on what she believed was her moment of triumph. She was convinced she was about to become the hero who had saved the bank from a teenage criminal mastermind. And then, as if summoned by her very words, 2 FBI agents walked through the glass doors of First National Bank. Jennifer's eyes lit up with vindication. She confidently strode toward them, pointing back at Michelle. "Officers, I caught her red-handed with stolen money." Agent Rodriguez, a tall man in a crisp navy suit, took one look at Michelle Williams. And then something absolutely impossible happened. Something that made every single person in that bank question everything they thought they knew about this situation. The entire bank went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Jennifer Peterson's face drained of every ounce of color as she stared in complete shock. But here's what was absolutely blowing my mind about this story, and what should blow yours too. Why were 2 FBI agents stunned to speak to a teenager? And what exactly didn't Jennifer Peterson know about Michelle Williams that was about to turn this entire situation completely upside down? If you were as stunned by this opening and you want to see how this incredible story unfolded, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because what happened next left everyone speechless. If you stand against prejudice, type yes in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. You will definitely get a heartwarming reply from Living Stories in the comments. But to understand how we got to that explosive moment in the bank, we need to rewind to earlier that morning, to a small coffee shop called B Cafe during the morning rush hour. This is where the first seeds of prejudice were planted, and where Michelle Williams first encountered the dangerous assumptions that would follow her throughout the day. Michelle walked into B Cafe with the kind of military, precise posture that immediately set her apart from other teenagers. She ordered a black coffee with an extra shot, not the sugary frappuccino you'd expect from a 16-year-old, but the serious choice of someone who had real responsibilities waiting for her. Behind her in line stood 2 middle-aged women, Linda and Carol, who were gossiping loudly enough for the entire coffee shop to hear their conversation. "These kids today think money grows on trees," Linda complained, shaking her head disapprovingly. Carol nodded in agreement, adding, "Parents just hand them credit cards, no work ethic whatsoever." And then came the moment that changed everything. When Michelle reached the counter to pay for her $4.50 coffee, she pulled out a $100 bill. The reaction was immediate and telling. Linda's voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper, but everyone could hear her. "Look at that. Where's a black kid getting money like that?" Carol didn't hesitate to answer, "Probably dealing drugs or stealing from people's wallets." Jake, the young barista attending to Michelle, was visibly uncomfortable as he made change for her. You could see him glancing at her sympathetically, clearly embarrassed by the women's loud assumptions. But Michelle handled the situation with a grace that was remarkable for someone her age. She calmly placed a business card on the counter and said, "Williams Academic Tutoring. If your kids need help with calculus or SAT prep." Then she tipped Jake $5 and wished him a wonderful day before walking out with her head held high. Linda and Carol exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly realizing they might have completely misjudged this young woman. But the damage was done. The theme was established. This was a world where a young black woman with money was automatically assumed to be up to no good. So who exactly was Michelle Williams? She was 16 years old, the daughter of Army Colonel Maria Williams, who had been deployed overseas for 8 months. While most teenagers were worried about homework and social media, Michelle was independently running a tutoring business that she'd built from the ground up. Her personality was a fascinating mix of quiet confidence and military bearing that she'd inherited from her mother. She was mature beyond her years in a way that only happens when life forces you to grow up fast. That day, she planned to deposit $15,000 at the bank. The $15,000 she was planning to deposit that day? Every penny of it was legitimate. Part of it came from her thriving tutoring business, where she helped younger students with advanced mathematics and college prep. The rest was money her mother had been saving during her deployment, money that Michelle was responsible for managing while her mother served overseas. For Michelle, this banking trip was routine. She'd done it before, always professional, always prepared. She was simply planning to make her deposit before school started. Just another responsibility in the carefully structured life of a military daughter. But the bank she was walking into was filled with people who would make the women at the coffee shop look open-minded by comparison. Jennifer Peterson, the 45-year-old bank manager, was the kind of person who saw threats everywhere and felt the need to prove herself with every interaction. Patricia, the 55-year-old head teller, represented old-school banking at its most rigid. She'd been there for decades and automatically followed Jennifer's lead without question, no matter how unreasonable the situation became. Robert, the loan officer in his 40s, was an ambitious kiss-up who desperately wanted Jennifer's approval. He was the type who would agree with anything his boss said, even when his conscience told him otherwise. These were the staff that Michelle Williams was about to encounter. A group of people who, with the exception of Marcus and eventually Sarah, were primed to see a young black woman with a large amount of cash as nothing more than a problem to be solved. They had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their professional lives. Michelle Williams walked into that bank with legitimate business, proper documentation, and the kind of family background that should have earned her respect. Instead, she was about to face something much darker. When Michelle Williams walked through the glass doors of First National Bank that morning, she looked every inch the professional young woman she was. Her documents were organized in a neat folder, her appearance was impeccable, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you belong wherever you are. Marcus, the security guard, immediately noticed her military family bearing and nodded respectfully as she passed. He'd served in Vietnam and could recognize that particular posture from a mile away. The way someone carries themselves when they've been raised in a family that understands discipline and respect. Amy, the young teller, processed Michelle's transaction nervously. When the large cash amount appeared on her screen, it automatically triggered the manager approval protocol. Amy's hands were literally shaking as she realized she'd have to call Jennifer Peterson over. That's when Jennifer swooped in like a hawk spotting prey. "What exactly is going on here?" she demanded, her voice already carrying an edge of suspicion. Amy explained that it was just a routine large deposit requiring manager approval. But Jennifer's first look at Michelle told a completely different story. Here was a teenager with a substantial amount of cash, and in Jennifer's mind, that equation could only equal trouble. Michelle remained polite and professional. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. Just a simple deposit today." But Jennifer's tone immediately shifted. "This doesn't look simple to me. Where did you get this money?" And that was the moment when everything started to go wrong. Jennifer's first accusation came fast and direct. "This looks like stolen money to me." Michelle calmly explained her tutoring business, mentioned that references were available, and described her mother's deployment savings. She provided every piece of information that should have satisfied any reasonable bank manager. But Jennifer just scoffed. "Tutoring? You expect me to believe that story?" What happened next was like watching a mob mentality form in real time. The bank staff began gathering around Jennifer like she was their leader, rallying them for battle. Patricia, the head teller, immediately validated Jennifer's approach. "Mrs. Peterson's just being thorough. Very smart approach." Robert, the ambitious loan officer, eagerly jumped in. "Exactly the kind of suspicious activity we're trained to catch." Even the customers started taking sides. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who'd been waiting in line, agreed with the manager's caution. Tom Wilson, a businessman making his own deposit, nodded and said, "Better safe than sorry with amounts like this." Sarah Chen, the assistant manager, had her first moment of hesitation. She wanted to check the account history, but Jennifer waved her off like her input wasn't needed or wanted. That's when Jennifer got bolder. "I think we're dealing with fraud money here." Through all of this, Michelle remained remarkably composed. She provided business cards, offered client references, and had documentation for everything. But none of it mattered. The narrative had already been written in Jennifer's mind. Jennifer's paranoia reached its peak when she declared, "No legitimate teenager has this kind of cash." That's when she made the decision to escort Michelle to the glass office in what she called the security area for further investigation. The staff validation intensified to an almost frightening degree. Patricia, drawing on her 20 years of experience, announced, "In my 20 years, legitimate money doesn't look like this." Robert, not to be outdone, added, "The attitude, the cash, the elaborate story. Classic fraud patterns." Even the customers felt entitled to weigh in. Someone commented that kids should have parents present for large transactions. The social media buzz was starting too. Amy was secretly filming parts of the interaction, and the early comments were all supporting the manager's actions. Jennifer's confidence was soaring. She truly believed she was the hero of this story. "I'm protecting this bank's reputation and our customers," she declared to anyone who would listen. But here's what was absolutely remarkable about Michelle Williams in this moment. Despite being isolated, accused, and humiliated in front of a room full of people, she maintained her quiet dignity. When another customer became upset by all the commotion, Michelle actually took the time to help calm them down. Think about that for a second. She was being accused of crimes she didn't commit, and she was still helping other people. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen was making a discovery that should have changed everything. She was looking up the Williams family account history and found that they had VIP status. She tried to interrupt Jennifer to share this information, but Jennifer wasn't interested in facts that contradicted her theory. Then came the phone tree. And this is where things escalated beyond anything Michelle could have imagined. Jennifer called the police, announcing, "I've got major suspicious activity here." The police dispatcher, following protocol, told her, "You absolutely did the right thing calling this in." Bank security validated her concerns. Textbook example of what to watch for. Each validation made Jennifer dramatically bolder. "This is stolen money, fraud money, or both," she proclaimed to the entire bank. That's when Michelle finally issued her first sharp warning. "Mrs. Peterson, you need to be very careful what you're saying." You'd think that would give Jennifer pause. Instead, she absolutely exploded. "Don't you dare threaten me. I know exactly what I'm seeing here." The staff doubled down even harder, offering more vocal support for what they saw as Jennifer's courageous stand against teenage criminality. Marcus, the security guard, was growing increasingly uncomfortable. His instincts were telling him something was very wrong, but hierarchy meant he couldn't intervene. That's when Jennifer made the decision that would seal her fate. She demanded real law enforcement professionals and called the FBI. While all this chaos was swirling around her, Michelle quietly sent a text message to an unknown contact. No one paid attention to what seemed like a teenager messaging a friend, but that simple text was about to change everything. Jennifer's final accusation rang through the bank. "You picked the wrong bank for your fraud schemes." The entire bank was now convinced they were witnessing the takedown of a teenage criminal mastermind. Staff members were congratulating themselves, customers were filming for social media, and Jennifer Peterson was riding the highest wave of professional validation she'd ever experienced. None of them had any idea that they were about to witness one of the most stunning reversals in banking history. And then, just as Jennifer was basking in her moment of triumph, something happened that made the racial bias absolutely undeniable. A 17-year-old white boy named Tyler walked up to Amy's teller window with nearly the same amount of cash, $14,000. He was wearing ripped jeans, a wrinkled t-shirt, and looked like he'd just rolled out of bed. Amy processed his transaction without blinking. No manager approval needed, apparently. No questions about where a teenager got that kind of money. No demands for documentation or references. Tyler deposited his cash, got his receipt, and walked out in under 3 minutes. Jennifer Peterson didn't even look in his direction. Patricia didn't question the legitimacy of his money. Robert didn't see any classic fraud patterns. Mrs. Henderson didn't suggest he should have brought his parents. Tom Wilson didn't think they needed to be better safe than sorry. The contrast was so stark, so obvious, that even some of the customers started glancing between Tyler's smooth transaction and Michelle's ongoing interrogation. But Jennifer and her supporters were too deep in their narrative to see what was right in front of them. Marcus, the security guard, watched this double standard play out, and his jaw visibly tightened. He'd seen enough discrimination in his lifetime to recognize it immediately, but protocol still bound his hands. Sarah Chen saw it too. She watched Tyler walk out without a single question while Michelle sat isolated in the glass office, and something clicked in her mind about how wrong this entire situation had become. But Jennifer Peterson? She was too busy preparing for the FBI arrival to notice that she just exposed her own prejudices for everyone to see. If you're sitting there thinking this story can't possibly get more intense, make sure you subscribe right now, because what happened when those FBI agents walked through that door was beyond anything anyone in that bank could have imagined. When the FBI dispatch was confirmed, Jennifer Peterson felt a rush of validation unlike anything she'd ever experienced in her banking career. This was her moment of ultimate triumph, her vindication for every decision she'd made throughout this confrontation. The staff erupted in celebration around her. Mrs. Peterson just saved the bank from major fraud, Patricia declared, beaming with pride at her manager's investigative skills. Even the customers were offering their approval. "Finally, someone who follows proper procedures," Mrs. Henderson announced to anyone who would listen. Jennifer was riding so high on this wave of validation that she couldn't resist one final jab at Michelle. Walking over to where the 16-year-old sat with remarkable composure, Jennifer said with a smirk, "Hope you enjoyed your little stolen money scheme." That's when Michelle delivered a serious warning that should have made Jennifer pause. "Mrs. Peterson, you should stop talking immediately." But Jennifer was too drunk on power to listen to reason. Her response was explosive rage. "I'll talk as much as I want. This is my bank." And then came the peak accusation, the moment when Jennifer Peterson sealed her own fate. "I don't care what sob story you tell. This is stolen money and fraud money." Michelle stood up slowly, and something fundamental shifted in the room. Her calm but unmistakably commanding presence emerged in a way that made even her accusers take notice. This wasn't the defensive posture of someone caught in wrongdoing. This was the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly who they were. Then the FBI agents walked through those glass doors, and Jennifer confidently strode toward them like a conquering hero. She launched into a detailed explanation of what she believed was an obvious fraud scheme. Her voice filled with the pride of someone who thought they'd cracked the case of the century. Agent Rodriguez, a tall man in a crisp navy suit, stopped mid-stride. Something about Michelle immediately caught his attention, in a way that him forget everything Jennifer was saying. But Jennifer was too caught up in her moment to notice. She continued aggressively, teenager with $15,000 in cash, obvious stolen money. Agent Foster, his blonde partner, began studying Michelle carefully. You could see recognition slowly dawning on her face like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Jennifer demanded loudly, pointing at Michelle, "Arrest her for fraud and money theft." That's when Michelle spoke quietly to the agents, her voice cutting through all of Jennifer's noise. "Agent Rodriguez, I believe you know my mother." Agent Rodriguez's expression completely changed. His professional mask dropped, replaced by something that looked like surprise mixed with respect. "Ma'am, are you Colonel Williams' daughter?" Jennifer, still oblivious to what was happening, interrupted frantically. "Don't fall for her lies. This is fraud money." And then came the moment that changed everything. Agent Rodriguez snapped to attention and delivered a sharp military salute with precision that spoke of deep respect and recognition. Agent Foster immediately followed suit, both agents saluting Michelle with the kind of profound respect usually reserved for high-ranking military officials or heads of state. The bank went completely dead silent. Every conversation stopped instantly. Every phone call ended mid-sentence. Every transaction froze. Jennifer stammered in complete confusion. "What? Why are you saluting her?" Patricia's face drained of every ounce of color. "Oh no. Oh dear God. No." Robert, the ambitious loan officer, stepped backward in horror as the magnitude of their mistake became clear. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly customer who had been so supportive of Jennifer's actions, sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "What have we done?" Marcus, the security guard, allowed himself a slight smile. Finally, justice was about to be served. But the most remarkable transformation was Michelle herself. In that moment, she shifted from accused teenager to respected authority figure. The calm composure that everyone had mistaken for guilt was actually the quiet confidence of someone who knew that truth always comes to light. Jennifer's entire world was crumbling around her. This can't be right. This is impossible. But it was right. It was more than right. It was about to expose every ugly assumption, every racial bias, and every failure of judgment that had led to this moment. The 16-year-old girl that Jennifer Peterson had accused of being a criminal was about to reveal just how catastrophically wrong one person's prejudices could be. The power had shifted completely, and Jennifer Peterson was about to learn that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one with the most power to change your life forever. What do you think should happen to Jennifer here? Should she be forgiven or sacked and arrested? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. The silence in that bank was absolutely deafening. Jennifer Peterson looked like she was watching her entire world collapse in slow motion. And she hadn't even heard the worst part yet. That's when Agent Rodriguez began to speak. "Colonel Maria Williams," he said, his voice filled with the kind of respect that only comes when you're talking about true American heroes. Bronze Star recipient for courage under fire in Afghanistan. Purple Heart for wounds received in combat while saving 3 fellow soldiers. She's currently serving overseas as part of a joint military FBI task force that has saved this country millions of dollars by stopping financial crimes before they happen. Jennifer's face went from pale to ghostly white. You could see her trying to process this information, trying to make it fit with the narrative she'd created in her mind about Michelle being a teenage criminal. But Agent Rodriguez wasn't finished. Not even close. He looked directly at Michelle with obvious admiration and continued, "And this remarkable young lady personally assists our financial crimes unit through a special program for military families. She's helped us identify patterns and inconsistencies that have led to major arrests and prosecutions. Her analytical skills are so sharp that our teams specifically request her input on complex cases. The impact of those words hit the bank like a physical force. Patricia, the head teller, actually gasped out loud. Robert, the loan officer, took several steps backward like he'd been slapped. Jennifer's legs looked like they might give out completely. "No, no, this can't be happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But then Agent Foster delivered what was essentially the knockout punch that ended Jennifer Peterson's career forever. The Williams family are major shareholders in this bank. They've been loyal customers and community supporters for over a decade. Colonel Williams has personally recommended this bank to dozens of military families because of the trust and respect she thought they showed to service members. The word "thought" hung in the air like a sword about to fall. That's when something happened that probably only occurs once in a lifetime. Something so unexpected that it felt like a movie scene playing out in real life. The large screen near the customer service area suddenly flickered to life, and there appeared Colonel Maria Williams, live from an overseas military base thousands of miles away. The video quality was crystal clear, and you could see that Colonel Williams was in full military uniform, her medals and commendations visible on her chest. Behind her, you could see other military personnel stopping their work to gather around, drawn by what was clearly an unusual and important situation developing. When Colonel Williams saw her daughter sitting in that glass office, when she realized what had been happening for the past hour, the look on her face was a mixture of immense pride in her daughter's composure and barely controlled anger at the treatment she'd received. You could see her jaw tighten as she took in the scene. Her 16-year-old daughter surrounded by people who had been treating her like a criminal. Behind Colonel Williams, other military personnel were gathering, officers, enlisted personnel, people who had clearly served alongside her and respected her enough to stop their important work to witness what was happening to her daughter. You could see them whispering among themselves, their faces showing the same mixture of pride and anger. Agent Foster immediately stepped forward, and the respect in her voice was unmistakable. "Ma'am, we are deeply, profoundly sorry for what your daughter has experienced here today. This is not representative of how military families should be treated in this country." The staff's horrified realization was actually painful to watch. Patricia, the head teller who had been so enthusiastic about supporting Jennifer's investigation, covered her face with both hands in complete shame. You could see her shoulders shaking as the full weight of what they'd done hit her. Robert, the ambitious loan officer who had eagerly jumped on the accusation bandwagon, backed away from the group like he was trying to disappear entirely, his face a mask of terror as he realized his career might be over too. The customers who had been so vocal in their support were scrambling just as desperately. Tom Wilson was frantically trying to delete the social media posts where he'd praised the bank manager's thoroughness, his fingers flying over his phone screen. Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted to crawl under a rock and disappear forever. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. But here's what was absolutely remarkable about this entire situation. Michelle Williams maintained that same calm authority she'd shown throughout this entire ordeal. Even with FBI agents apologizing to her, even with her mother appearing on screen, even with the complete vindication of everything she'd said, she didn't gloat, she didn't lose her composure, she didn't even raise her voice. Looking directly at Agent Rodriguez with the kind of maturity that most adults never achieve, she said, "I trust this incident will be documented appropriately and that steps will be taken to ensure no other military family faces this kind of treatment." And then came the moment that Jennifer Peterson had been dreading since those agents walked through the door, though she still had no idea just how completely her world was about to change. Michelle reached into her backpack with deliberate, controlled movements and pulled out a business card. But this wasn't the tutoring card she'd tried to show Jennifer earlier, the one that had been dismissed and ignored. This was something entirely different. An elegant card with official letterhead that made several people in the bank audibly gasp when they caught a glimpse of it. "Mrs. Peterson," Michelle said, her voice carrying an authority that no one in that bank could question anymore, an authority that seemed to fill the entire space. "You are hereby terminated from your position, effective immediately." Jennifer's response was desperate, panicked denial. "You can't fire me. You're just a teenager. I was protecting the bank from fraud. I was doing my job." But Michelle's authority was absolutely unshakable. Standing up to her full height, she looked Jennifer directly in the eyes and said, "I'm exercising my family's shareholder rights immediately. Your employment with this institution is terminated for discrimination, harassment, and violation of banking protocols." That's when Agent Rodriguez dropped another bombshell that made Jennifer's situation even worse. "Ma'am, there may also be federal civil rights violations to address here. This incident will definitely be part of an official FBI investigation into discriminatory practices. The way you've treated a military family, especially the daughter of a decorated combat veteran, could result in federal charges." You could watch Jennifer's complete breakdown happen in real time. It wasn't just embarrassment or frustration. It was the complete destruction of everything she thought she knew about herself and her career. The realization that her career wasn't just damaged, that it wasn't just a bad day at work, but that it was destroyed forever, hit her like a physical blow. Everything she'd worked for over the past 20 years, every professional relationship she'd built, every future opportunity in banking, all of it was gone because she'd let her prejudices cloud her judgment. The staff's scrambling was almost as pathetic as Jennifer's denial. Patricia and Robert were desperately trying to distance themselves from the investigation they'd so enthusiastically supported just minutes earlier. You could see them whispering to each other, probably trying to figure out how to save their own careers. But then something absolutely beautiful happened. Something that restored a little faith in human nature after watching such ugly behavior. Sarah Chen, the assistant manager who had tried multiple times to check the Williams family account history, finally found her voice. She stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly but her voice clear and strong. "I tried repeatedly to tell Mrs. Peterson to check the Williams family account. They've been VIP customers for years. I witnessed everything that happened here today, and I can confirm that Mrs. Peterson ignored proper protocols and treated this customer with unacceptable discrimination." Marcus, the security guard who had been forced to watch this injustice unfold due to hierarchy and protocol, stepped forward next. "I have everything on the security cameras. Every word, every accusation, every moment of disrespect. I've been in this business for 40 years and I've never seen anything like this." Even Amy, the young teller who had been completely intimidated by Jennifer's aggressive management style throughout this entire ordeal, found her courage. "I recorded some of it on my phone too. I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared to speak up. I'm sorry I didn't do more to help." Jennifer Peterson's exit from that bank was nothing short of completely humiliating. Security personnel had to escort her out while customers watched and filmed, many of them posting videos to social media in real time. Her career in banking was over, and everyone in that building knew it. But more than that, her reputation in the community was destroyed. Word would spread quickly about what had happened, and she would become known as the woman who discriminated against a military family. But here's the thing. The story wasn't finished yet. Because while all this drama was unfolding, while Jennifer was being fired and escorted out, something else was happening that would put the final nail in the coffin of her prejudiced assumptions and expose just how wrong she'd been about everything. Remember Tyler, the 17-year-old white boy who had waltzed into the bank during Michelle's interrogation and deposited $14,000 without facing a single question? The teenager who had been wearing ripped jeans, and a wrinkled t-shirt, who looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, who had processed his transaction in under 3 minutes, while Michelle was being treated like a criminal. Well, it turned out the FBI wasn't just there because of Jennifer's panicked call about Michelle. They were also in the middle of tracking stolen money from a major theft at a local electronics store that had happened 3 days earlier. The thieves had made off with nearly $50,000 in cash from the store's safe, and the FBI had been following the money trail through various bank deposits. They had clear security footage of the thief from the electronics store, and they'd been systematically checking banks in the area where deposits matching the stolen bills' serial numbers had been made. As Michelle was being vindicated and Jennifer was being escorted out in shame, Agent Foster happened to notice Tyler trying to leave quietly through a side exit, clearly hoping to avoid the commotion happening in the main banking area. She called out to him, "Excuse me, young man, could you wait a moment, please?" When Tyler turned around, both FBI agents immediately recognized him. Not because they knew him personally, but because they'd been studying security footage from the electronics store for 3 days, and Tyler's face was burned into their memory as the primary suspect. Agent Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed Tyler's photo from the store security footage to Agent Foster, who nodded grimly. Tyler was arrested on the spot for theft, burglary, and money laundering. The irony of that moment was so devastating, so perfect, that it felt like the universe itself was making the point about the danger of prejudice and assumptions. Jennifer Peterson had spent hours interrogating, humiliating, and falsely accusing a legitimate businesswoman whose family had served this country with honor and distinction, while the actual criminal, a white teenager with stolen money, had been processed without facing a single question, without providing a single piece of identification, without anyone even looking at him twice. The visual was absolutely devastating and unforgettable. Tyler being led away in handcuffs, his head hanging in shame, while Michelle stood tall and dignified, with 2 FBI agents showing her respect and apologizing for her treatment. Several customers who had filmed Jennifer's accusations of Michelle immediately turned their cameras toward Tyler's arrest, and you could hear their shocked comments. "Oh my God, he was the real criminal. We were all watching the wrong person. How did we get this so wrong?" Back to the video call with Colonel Williams. This decorated military officer, this woman who had literally bled for her country, looked at her daughter with obvious pride and said in a voice that carried across the entire bank, "Michelle, you handled yourself with the grace and dignity that makes me proud to be your mother. You represented our family and our military values perfectly." The other military personnel behind Colonel Williams were nodding in agreement, and several of them saluted Michelle through the screen, showing their respect for how she'd conducted herself under such difficult circumstances. The bank executives arrived within the hour, having been called by the security company that monitored the cameras. They were apologizing profusely and immediately implementing new policies to prevent this kind of discrimination from ever happening again. Sarah Chen was promoted to manager that same day, with a significant salary increase and a commendation for trying to do the right thing. Marcus was not only commended for documenting everything, but was also given a promotion to head of security. Amy was praised for having the courage to record evidence, and she was enrolled in the bank's management training program. Jennifer Peterson? She never worked in banking again. In fact, she never worked in customer service again. Word spread quickly through the financial industry about what had happened, and her name became synonymous with discrimination and poor judgment. The video footage went viral, ensuring that her face and her actions would be remembered for years to come. But Michelle Williams? She took this terrible experience and turned it into something positive that would help countless other people. She established a comprehensive financial literacy program specifically designed for military families, ensuring that no other service member's child would face what she'd experienced. The program became a model for banks across the country, teaching both financial skills to military families and cultural sensitivity to bank employees. The social media explosion was absolutely massive. The videos went viral within hours, sparking conversations about unconscious bias, the treatment of military families, and the danger of making assumptions based on appearance, age, or race. News outlets picked up the story, and it became a case study in business schools and diversity training programs. Major corporations reached out to Michelle, offering her internships and scholarships. Universities sent recruitment letters. The tutoring business that Jennifer had dismissed as fake became so successful that Michelle had to hire additional tutors to handle all the requests. But perhaps the most powerful part of this entire story was Michelle's response when a reporter asked how she felt about Jennifer's firing and the destruction of her career. Michelle looked directly into the camera and said, "I hope this becomes a learning moment for everyone involved. Prejudice hurts not just the victim, but the person holding the prejudice too." Mrs. Peterson lost her career because she couldn't see past her assumptions. I hope other people learn from her mistake and choose to treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their age, race, or appearance. That level of maturity, grace, and wisdom from a 16-year-old who had just been falsely accused of being a criminal was absolutely remarkable. The story didn't end there, though. 6 months later, Michelle was invited to speak at banking conferences about her experience. A year later, she received a full scholarship to study business and finance at any university she chose. 2 years later, the anti-discrimination training program inspired by her experience was implemented in over 3,000 banks nationwide. Jennifer Peterson, meanwhile, moved to another state and took a job as a night shift security guard, still living with the consequences of letting her prejudices destroy her career and reputation. If this story has opened your eyes about the power of unconscious bias and the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their age, race, or appearance, hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this need to be told, shared, and remembered. What happened next was like watching a company go into full crisis mode in real time. Within 30 minutes of Tyler's arrest and Jennifer's firing, 3 black sedans pulled up outside First National Bank. Out stepped the bank's top executives, including the regional president, the head of corporate communications, and an entire team of lawyers who looked like they'd been pulled away from very expensive dinners. These weren't just any executives. These were the people who controlled the bank's reputation, its stock price, and its relationships with major institutional clients. They walked into that bank knowing they were facing a public relations nightmare that could cost the company millions of dollars and destroy relationships they'd spent decades building. The first thing they did was approach Michelle and Colonel Williams, who was still on the video call from overseas. The regional president, a man in his 60s, who had probably never personally apologized to a customer in his entire career, spoke directly to the screen. "Colonel Williams, on behalf of First National Bank, I offer you and your daughter our most profound and sincere apologies. What happened here today is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of our institution." But the executives knew that private apologies weren't going to be enough, because while they were making their damage control calls, something extraordinary was happening on social media that was completely beyond their control. The videos that customers had taken were exploding across every platform you can imagine. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Everywhere you looked, people were sharing footage of Jennifer's accusations, Michelle's calm responses, the FBI salute moment, and Tyler's arrest. The hashtags Michelle Williams, Banking While Black, Military Family, and Justice Served were trending nationwide within hours. But this wasn't just random social media buzz. This was massive public outrage from people who recognized themselves or their own children in Michelle's situation. Parents were sharing the videos with comments like, This could have been my daughter. Military families were expressing their anger that a service member's child had been treated this way. Young entrepreneurs were talking about how they'd faced similar discrimination. The numbers were staggering. The main video of Jennifer's accusations had over 2 million views in the first 6 hours. The FBI salute moment had been shared over 500,000 times. Tyler's arrest footage was being used in discussions about racial profiling and unconscious bias. News outlets started picking up the story. Local TV stations arrived at the bank within hours. National networks were calling for interviews. Cable news shows were using the footage as examples of discrimination in everyday life. The story was becoming much bigger than just one incident at one bank. But perhaps the most powerful response came from the local community, especially the military families who had banked at First National for years. Word spread quickly through the military base about what had happened to Colonel Williams's daughter, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Military families started showing up at the bank, not to cause trouble, but to show support for Michelle, and to express their disappointment with how she'd been treated. Veterans in their uniforms stood quietly outside the bank, holding signs that read, "We stand with Michelle," and "Military families deserve respect." The sight of these veterans, people who had served their country and put their lives on the line for freedom, peacefully protesting outside a bank because of how a fellow service member's daughter had been treated, was incredibly powerful. Local news stations filmed the gathering, and those images went viral too. Inside the bank, the executives were working frantically to contain the damage. They knew they had to act fast and decisively to show that they took this situation seriously. Sarah Chen, who had tried repeatedly to warn Jennifer about the Williams family's VIP status, was immediately promoted to interim manager. The executives didn't just give her Jennifer's old job, they gave her a significant salary increase, a public commendation for trying to do the right thing, and full authority to implement whatever changes she felt were necessary to prevent future incidents. Sarah's first act as manager was to personally apologize to Michelle and to assure her that the bank would do everything possible to regain her family's trust. Her second act was to immediately begin developing new policies that would prevent this kind of discrimination from happening again. The new policies were comprehensive and far-reaching. Mandatory bias training for all employees, not just a quick online course, but intensive, ongoing education about unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. A new discrimination reporting system that would allow employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Regular audits of customer interactions to identify patterns of discriminatory behavior. And most importantly, a new protocol that required managers to check customer account history before making any accusations or taking any unusual actions. But these policy changes weren't just happening at one branch. The bank's corporate executives, desperate to show they were taking this seriously, announced that the new policies would be implemented at all locations nationwide. They were essentially using Michelle's experience to overhaul their entire approach to customer service and employee training. Marcus, the security guard who had documented everything and recognized the injustice from the beginning, was not only commended, but was promoted to head of security for the entire region. The executives recognized that his 40 years of experience and his moral courage made him exactly the kind of person they needed in leadership. Amy, the young teller who had been intimidated by Jennifer, but had still found the courage to record evidence, was enrolled in the bank's management training program with a full scholarship. The executives wanted to make sure that employees who showed moral courage were rewarded and developed. But what Michelle Williams did next showed a level of grace and maturity that left everyone speechless. Instead of focusing on revenge or punishment, instead of demanding massive financial compensation or using her newfound fame for personal gain, Michelle announced that she wanted to turn this terrible experience into something positive that would help other people. She proposed establishing a comprehensive financial literacy program specifically designed for military families. The program would teach financial planning, investment strategies, banking procedures, and economic rights to service members and their families. But more than that, it would also train bank employees about the unique financial situations that military families face: deployments, frequent moves, irregular pay schedules, and the specific challenges of managing money while serving overseas. The bank executives, still in full damage control mode, immediately agreed to fund the program. But Michelle's vision was bigger than just one bank. She wanted to create a model that could be implemented nationwide, helping thousands of military families while also educating financial institutions about how to better serve the people who serve our country. The program became known as the Williams Military Financial Literacy Initiative, and within 6 months, it was being implemented in banks across the country. Michelle became the youngest person ever to receive a national award for community service from a major veterans organization. Meanwhile, Jennifer Peterson's final humiliation was being played out in front of the entire community. As the executives were announcing new policies and promotions, Jennifer was being escorted out of the bank by security while customers watched and filmed. Her career in banking was over, her reputation in the community was destroyed, and the videos of her discriminatory behavior would follow her forever. She tried to give interviews to local news stations, attempting to defend her actions by claiming she was just following protocol. But every interview only made things worse, as reporters asked her why Tyler had been processed without questions, while Michelle had been interrogated and accused. She had no good answers. Within a week, Jennifer's name had become synonymous with workplace discrimination. Employment lawyers were using her case as an example of how unconscious bias could destroy careers. Business schools were analyzing her decision-making process as a study in how prejudice leads to catastrophic judgment errors. She eventually moved to another state, taking a job that had nothing to do with customer service or banking. Even years later, a simple Google search of her name brought up the videos of her accusations and the moment she was fired by a 16-year-old girl. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this entire story was what happened 3 months later, when Michelle Williams went back to her normal teenage life. Picture this scene. Michelle sitting at a kitchen table in her modest apartment, helping a 12-year-old named David with his algebra homework. David's parents work 2 jobs each and can't afford expensive tutoring, so Michelle tutors him for free through a program she started for low-income families. "I don't understand why x equals 5, David says, frustrated with the equation in front of him. Michelle smiles and patiently explains the steps again, breaking down the problem in a way that makes sense to a 12-year-old. She's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her hair is in a simple ponytail, and she looks like exactly what she is, a normal teenager helping a younger kid with math. "Oh," David's face lights up when he finally understands. "I get it now. You're the best tutor ever." Michelle laughs and gives him a high five. "You did the work, David. I just showed you the path." This is who Michelle Williams really is. Not the viral video star, not the girl who fired a bank manager, not the face of a national conversation about discrimination. She's a teenager who loves math, who started a business to help other kids succeed, who handles responsibility with grace, and who chooses to use her experiences, even the terrible ones, to make life better for other people. Her phone buzzes with a text from her mother. "Proud of you every day, sweetheart. Can't wait to come home and give you the biggest hug." Michelle texts back, "Love you too, Mom." David just solved his first quadratic equation. Colonel Williams, still serving overseas, smiles when she reads that text. She knows her daughter is going to be just fine. The story of Michelle Williams and Jennifer Peterson became more than just a viral video or a news story. It became a teaching moment that changed how thousands of people think about their own biases and assumptions. Schools started using the footage in lessons about respect and dignity. Companies used it in diversity training. Parents showed it to their children as an example of how to handle unfair treatment with grace and strength. The message was clear and powerful. Never underestimate anyone based on their age, race, appearance, or assumptions about their background. The quiet 16-year-old in line ahead of you might be running a successful business. The young person making a large deposit might come from a family of heroes. The teenager you're tempted to dismiss might have more wisdom and strength than you've developed in decades of life. Michelle Williams proved that dignity, intelligence, and character have nothing to do with age or appearance, and everything to do with how you choose to carry yourself through both good times and challenging moments. Her story reminds us that in a world where it's easy to make snap judgments and hold on to unconscious biases, the choice to treat every person with respect and dignity isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. Because you never know when the person you're underestimating might surprise you in ways you never imagined. If this incredible story has inspired you to think differently about how you treat other people, especially young people who might be achieving more than you realize, please hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like Michelle's need to be shared because they remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're treated with the respect they deserve.